Hello. Well, last Christmas was so hopeful, wasn't it? Uh, but things took a turn for the worse after that, didn't they? January was fine and February was okay, but there were little suspicions of things happening. And then a bit later on, March, it was really bad. And then we had the first lockdown, and then nothing much seems to have happened. Nothing much seems to have happened since then. The world came to a halt. But we have to look at things a bit more in the long term. You see, because of COVID, a lot more research has been done into coronaviruses. A lot more. I mean, there was always some research. I remember Britain had something called the Common Cold Institute. I mean, I think it was closed down in the 60s. I remember seeing a film, I'm sure it was with Kenneth More, which was one of those comedy sort of, it was a comedy, really. I don't remember anything more about it but this. Kenneth More, it starts with Kenneth More sitting out in a drafty field with, I don't know what, a wet blanket round him, and some guy in a white coat who's taking his temperature, and there's nothing wrong with him. And it turns out this is one guy, he's at the Common Cold Institute as a guinea pig, and he could never catch a cold. And I don't remember the name of the film. He couldn't catch a cold, and then the whole film goes on, and he falls in love with this girl. And at the very end of the film, I think he realizes he's in love with her or something, and he starts to sneeze. He has become subject to colds, which actually sort of echoes the Gilgamesh epic, doesn't it? What was the name of Gilgamesh's friend? Ekidanu? Do you know? I've forgotten his name. Anyway, he was a big, strong creature of nature, and the way he was tamed and became human was when Gilgamesh sent a prostitute to teach this guy about sex. Just a minute, I'm going to look up Gilgamesh friend. Enkidu. Oh, I got it nearly right. So that was an interesting little side thing. There's always this sort of folk thing in our minds, which might actually have come to us from the Gilgamesh epic, because that filtered through along the lines of communication. I mean, it had 5,000 years to do it, didn't it? And it's sort of interesting, the creation myth as well. It has Adam, who's in literally a state of nature, and then God gives him a woman. The Hebrews who wrote that Bible, they turned the story so that it was the woman's fault, not that it was a civilizing of the man, but it was a downfall of him, and becoming human was a bad thing. Whereas in the Gilgamesh epic, it was a good thing. It stopped him from rampaging around literally like an ape, which is obviously what Enkidu was before. All right, so I've gone right off the subject here, haven't I? Why did I get onto that? Ah, yes, it was the common cold, wasn't it? That film about the common cold. So they've been doing a lot of research on the common cold for many years, and flu is a similar virus. And the big problem has always been that the virus has this habit of mutating. That's why they give a different flu vaccination every year, because there's no one vaccination for flu. And what they've been doing with the COVID-19 is looking for other ways to get at this virus. And the Pfizer one, at any rate, lit on the idea that the shell, I don't know whether this is the case, but it appears to be. This might be completely a wrong view. The shell remains more or less the same. It's the RNA inside the virus that changes. So if the shell remains the same, then you can make a vaccine for the shell rather than the virus. And if they come up with something that will deal with this, this will have knock-on effects down the years for all sorts of viruses. And remember, there are viruses that cause cancer. Papillomavirus, that causes cancer, cervical cancer in this case. So we have this research, which was accelerated by misfortune and death and fear, might actually benefit humanity in ways we can't even imagine now, and rid us, or at least protect us, from a lot of really dangerous diseases down the line. This might be awful now. Well, it is awful now, but I mean, just look at this lot here. Lockdowns, families. There's a little old lady I used to visit. Once a week I went round to visit her, a neighbour of mine, and then in the last months of her life, they wouldn't let me see her. And she had carers round her, but I feel bad that I couldn't get to see her in her last days, and I wasn't even a relative. I just went round. She had the most wonderful stories of a life before the Second World War and during the Second World War. I am the poorer for not hearing more of her memories, I tell you that. And my personal sadness is nothing to the personal sadness of people who've lost their businesses, who've lost close relatives, whose world has been turned upside down. So this has been a terrible year. But there is never... there has rarely been a year so terrible that things didn't come out of it. The Black Death, for instance, between 30 and 45% of the population in 2 years, between 1348 and 1350, died. But because of that, I mean, that's a terrible price to pay. But the system of serfdom just broke down, because the labour of the peasants became that much so valuable that the whole system broke down, and it paved the way for the democracy that Britain became before everybody else, and propelled Britain into the front of the world stage, which took to the rest of the world democratic ideas as well as the end of slavery in the West and in many other parts of the world. It probably saved a lot more lives than those who died during the Black Death. But of course, the people who were suffering through that awful time would not have been able to see that. So we have to remember that when awful things happen, very often good things many years later, which we frequently don't see, turn up. However, meanwhile, we're stuck here with our wood for the trees view, and Christmas is it's not going to stop. People are going to have relatives round. People are going to have relatives round illegally, but it's all taking the shine of Christmas, that's for sure. And we've got this going on. So I want to wish you all a Merry Christmas. I know that sounds a little bit ironic, but it isn't. It's bad. There are things bad happening, but there are things that are hopeful happening. After all, isn't that what Christmas is all